This episode of Bullet Heaven was made with a copy of the game provided by Zerodiv. Now this is more like it. In the last episode of Bullet Heaven, we took a look at Samurai Aces for the Nintendo Switch, and we came away a little less than impressed. But we knew that it was only the beginning for developer Psikyo in 1993, and later games had definitely improved. The Strikers 1945 series is a great example of this, and 2 of the 3 games have already seen release to the Switch as of this episode. In every way, the very improvements we mentioned in the last episode have been made.
Strikers 1945-2 for Nintendo Switch was released on January 25, 2018, alongside Zero Gunner 2-. It was originally released by Psikyo to arcades in 1997, with a home port making its way to the Sega Saturn the next year. It was also released for PlayStation worldwide between 2000 and 2003, with the North American release confusingly called Strikers 1945 without the 2. Other compilations and ports also exist from PS2 to mobile. In Series 4, we really dug the Saturn version of this game. So how does the Nintendo Switch version hold up? Let's take a closer look.
Strikers 1945-2 has players taking on a set of 8 stages in an alternate World War II conflict. Players have their choice of 6 real-world aircraft, each with their own special fire patterns, movement speeds, special attacks, and bombers. We'll get this out of the way first. The control in Strikers 1945-2 is pretty much spot on.
Strikers 1945-2 is every bit as Psikyo as you'd think. Players move about the screen via 8-way control, which, once again, feels better depending on the controller being used. The Switch's Joy-Con controllers have great response through their analog sticks, but larger controllers will feel better with a solid D-pad. There's an ever so slightly pronounced input lag when playing in TV mode, but in handheld mode there's none whatsoever. There are still times that the controls feel just a smidge on the slippery side regardless.
Players fire their plane's main weapons with either the A button for dedicated rapid shots or the Y button for tap-to-repeat fire. Holding the Y button will engage their plane's special attack, which is dependent on a gauge that is charged through enemy destruction and bullet collision to various degrees of power. As long as the gauge is charged to at least level 1, this weapon can be used. It only takes a very brief amount of time to hold and activate the player's special weapons with the Y button, which is deployed when Y is released. Compared to Samurai Aces, this weapon deployment feels almost instantaneous.
The bombers in Strikers 1945-2 are actually not really bombs at all. Instead, players will summon support aircraft that will attack enemies and provide cover for the player to duck behind in an effort to avoid enemy fire. These special support craft are deployed with the B or X buttons and will remain on screen for a set amount of time, or until they are destroyed, whichever comes first. Some are more effective than others, but end up being pretty balanced throughout the entire roster. Enemies will drop extra bomber pickups in each stage, allowing for fairly liberal use, especially against the bosses. Unlike Samurai Aces, an instant bullet clear is also granted as the player's support planes fly in.
When certain enemies and emplacements are destroyed, weapon power-ups can be dropped which increase the player's main shot power by 1 level. The player's shots can be upgraded to a maximum level of 5 and feature special subfire as players continue using their primary weapons. Each plane has its own unique automatic sub-shots that further balances each craft in terms of power and usability. These power-up drops will also move much further down the screen in Strikers 1945-2, which definitely cuts down on frustration and cheap shot deaths. This is in stark contrast to Samurai Aces power-ups, which only made it around halfway down the playfield. However, as players achieve a higher power level, fewer of these power-up drops will appear.
An interesting feature is also employed in Strikers 1945-2. If a player is hit by an enemy aircraft, their weapon power will drop by 1 level instead of dying. This applies only to the enemy aircraft themselves, as shots still kill a player instantly, forcing players back to level 1 shot power. This feature was previously employed in Gunbird and Strikers 1945-2's direct predecessor and subsequently used in many other of Psikyo's games since.
Strikers 1945-2 is every bit as hard as you'd expect a Psikyo game to be. Once again, several difficulties exist here, with even lower settings presenting a sizable challenge thanks to Strikers 1945-2's fast bullets, complex patterns, and seemingly random bullet barf salvos. Players have 3 lives and 2 backup credits to start, but more lives and credits can be added in the game's meta options to lend a helping hand. These options, along with others like controller settings, audio-visual options, and so forth, are accessible through the plus button.
As is the case with other Psikyo games, the order of the first 4 stages are randomly chosen by the game, making it fairly fresh with every playthrough. Likewise, starting on stage 5, players must start the stage over again if a credit is used to continue. Infinite continues can help, but if a player lacks the skill to make it through the later stages, especially 6, 7, and 8, a lot of practice will probably be needed to see Strikers 1945-2 to the end.
Co-op games definitely help in this respect as, like other Psikyo titles, players can use credits to immediately pick up where they left off, even in later stages. Beyond this, of course, having an extra player with a full complement of support bombers makes for a pretty strategic game, especially with so many fast, small bullets flying around. However, care should be taken. If support has already been used by one player, the other player's support will cancel out and clear the previous player's bomber.
On the whole, Strikers 1945-2 is a fantastic game on all fronts, especially with its solid mechanics. But one small issue we had was that some of the bullets blended in a bit with certain backgrounds, especially sandy ones. It's not especially terrible, even on the Switch's main screen, but having a bigger screen definitely helps in seeing them more easily.
All in all, Strikers 1945-2 continues to stand as one of our favorite Psikyo releases to date, even if it totally emasculates us. I mean, Strikers 1945-2's difficulty is, no kidding, marketed on the game's information page on Nintendo's website as one that aims to make players cry. Quote, "The Psikyo made an awful disaster that was called Psikyo Bullets. Many players felt an indignation about speedy bullets from enemies, and they cried at the end." What? Once again here, Monkey Mode is still plenty intense towards the end of the game, though it's much better balanced overall than Samurai Aces was. The scoring in Strikers 1945-2 is fairly simple, as is the case with many of Psikyo's other titles. Simply shooting the player's opposition and wreaking as much havoc as possible will drive the player's score upward.
A number of ground-based enemies and emplacements will leave behind shining medals as well. These medals will cycle through an animation loop that will award the players with 200 points at their dullest and 2,000 points at their brightest. The sound triggered by the pickup will also change according to how big the bonus is.
If a player continues to collect power-ups at maximum level, they will also be awarded with a 4,000 point bonus. The extend score in Strikers 1945-2 is pretty high, 600,000 points. So knowing how to maximize medal score and collecting as many power-ups as players can will be key in getting there as fast as possible. So long as players can endure Strikers 1945-2's high-rank onslaught, that is.
Once again, there are no online leaderboards in Strikers 1945-2. Players will only really be able to stack each other up by sharing screenshots of their exploits on social media. Each difficulty mode has its own leaderboard as well, allowing for players of any skill level to try for the highest amount of points they can muster.
Finally, unlike Gunbird and Samurai Aces, the score in Strikers 1945-2 is wiped if the player uses a credit to continue. This definitely makes it harder for players of a lower skill level to hit that extend score, but it also makes for a more pure scoring system, one that serious shmup players are bound to appreciate. Another clear improvement found in Strikers 1945-2 is in its overall presentation. From its visuals to its sound, Strikers 1945-2 shows how far Psikyo had come in just 4 years compared to Samurai Aces in 1993.
Visually, Strikers 1945-2 has the kind of detail one would expect from a 2D Psikyo game with detailed backdrops, enemies, and player aircraft. Made up of a good blend of pre-rendered and pixel art sprites, Strikers 1945-2's visuals are clear and generally easy to see. Bosses have a crazy transformation phase, which is a must-have staple in Psikyo shooting games. Especially in the case of the player's support attacks, lavishly animated loops and huge planes are also visually impactful and always impressive to watch.
That's not to say that they're perfect, though. The pre-rendered player select screen art is particularly grainy, with cheesy clip art style lettering for each plane. Enemy fire is generally clear to see, and player fire is never confused, even in two-player games.
The sound in Strikers 1945-2 is generally good, but the sound balance makes for a noisy time with the player's shots and subshots, sometimes getting a little tiresome, especially in the case of the Wolf's main shots or the Lightning's rocket subshots. Some other effects are a little weak, like the plane's engine sound at the title screen, but the rest sound really good, with satisfying explosions and good alert sounds.
The music in Strikers 1945-2 is far and away the best one from Psikyo that we've heard to date, with an entire OST of great standout tracks. Multiple boss themes, great core stage tracks, not to mention one of the best stage completion jingles ever. It all comes together to form an OST that's not only well composed, but also well sampled. An absolute improvement over Gunbird, Samurai Aces, and Strikers 1945-1.
As with all Zerodiv games, Strikers 1945-2 has an excellent, easy-to-understand interface with great wallpapers and high-quality art on each player's respective side of the screen. The player's score, number of lives, and bomb stock is easy to see at a glance. Unfortunately, the pre-rendered intro and cool aircraft compendium from the Japanese Saturn release are absent from this version. There are also times that a bit of Japanese pokes out, even if the game is in English. Granted, much of Strikers 1945-2 was in English on the Saturn as well, and this extremely minor oversight doesn't affect the gameplay.
As is typically the case, display options that allow for unfiltered chunky pixels, bicubic-style blurring, and scan lines exist. And of course, as is the case with all of Zerodiv's Tate-style vertical shooters, a vertical screen rotation option also exists for Tate at home or on the go.
So, how does Strikers 1945-2 for Nintendo Switch stack up? Let's take a look.
The controls in Strikers 1945-2 are very sharp on the whole, but can feel from time to time ever so slightly slippery.
Still, Strikers 1945-2 handles way better than Samurai Aces.
A lot of pattern memorization is going to be required to efficiently avoid the hail of fast, small shots and randomized bullet barf style attacks.
Lower difficulties are also no walk in the park.
With 8 stages of decent length and 2 loops on higher difficulties, there's a lot to play and practice in Strikers 1945-2.
Extra lives can help in getting crucial practice in.
Definitely a step up from Strikers 1945-1, Strikers 1945-2's mix of pre-rendered and pixel art sprites blend together well.
To see this game through to the end on default, lives, and credits will take the average player a decent amount of time regardless, even on lower difficulties.
Sound-wise, Strikers 1945-2 has much more of an identity when compared to previous Psikyo releases with an excellent OST.
The mechanical design and cool transforming bosses are typical Psikyo, which is just as great as you'd expect.
Strikers 1945-2 features a great amount of ingenious mechanics for both gameplay and scoring from the first installment in the series.
The sound effects here are also good in general, with some shots and subshots becoming a little irritating over time. But having a bomber that summons support aircraft that not only heavily damage the player's opposition but also provide cover? That's a pretty darn cool feature. The addition of multiple special weapon levels also makes for a more flexible weapon system.
Strikers 1945-2 for Nintendo Switch is, once again, available for only $8, so playing this game is very affordable.
This is one of the better games in the 4 Nintendo Switch series, and $8 is a great price point.
Well, Zerodiv did it again. Strikers 1945-2 for Nintendo Switch is essential shooting gameplay for the system. It's hard, but much more playable than Samurai Aces by a long shot. Grab a friend and shmup it up. Strikers 1945-2 gets a 4.5 out of 5. You can get a copy of Strikers 1945-2 on the Nintendo eShop for about $8. I wonder what's next from Zerodiv. Some people are saying it'll be Sengoku Blade, Strikers 1945-3, or Gunbird 2.
I think Sengoku Blade would be pretty cool to see.
Yeah, that one is one of the very few horizontal Psikyo games to be made.
That's actually kinda cool. Do you think it's as hard as the rest?